As I showed you earlier, it was a historic day in Washington with the Trump administration, the president himself overseeing the signing of these deals, the diplomatic relations established between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, effectively peace deals in the Middle East. Let's go to Dave Sharma, Liberal MP for Wentworth, former Australian ambassador to Israel. Just how significant a breakthrough is this, Dave? This is Sunni nations joining with Israel and the US effectively to buttress themselves against Iran.
Well, I think it's massively significant, Chris. I don't think you can overstate that. There's two conservative countries, the UAE and Bahrain, run by, Gulf monarchies, and they're making peace with Israel, without any necessarily a quid pro quo. It's because they recognise it's in their interests to do so. And this is the biggest breakthrough Israel's had in its international space since 1994, since its peace treaty with Jordan. So this is a big deal, no doubt about it.
Now, you, like me, have been supportive of Donald Trump's bold move to declare Jerusalem, recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Is that a key move in this strategy? He's made a play there that demonstrated people had to be realistic about negotiations?
I think that's right. I mean, I think, the Middle East was a bit of a frozen wasteland. It had been kind of stuck in the past, and the historical conflicts of the past kind of dominated the politics of today. And what Trump has done is he's really shaken things up and disrupted and said we're not going to be held hostage to the conflicts and grievances of the past. We need to be looking to the future, not to the past. And, Jerusalem is Israel's capital. We're going to treat it as such. And the rest of the nation should get on board because we're moving ahead. And I think that really prompted a kind of a rush of pragmatism throughout the region because people realised that, certain issues and certain groups could no longer exercise a veto over progress. And I think the UAE and Bahrain are showing the same sort of spirit of pragmatism. And it's a positive sum view of the region. They recognise that a relationship with Israel is good for them, good for Israel, good for the region. It's a win for all.
Now, there is no doubt that it changes the dynamic in the region. Both President Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are promising there'll be more. Are we about to see Israel strike diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia?
I think it's definitely under consideration. I mean, Bahrain and the UAE would not have done this without Saudi agreement and Saudi blessing. Saudi's got a more conservative, establishment, more conservative population. And I think they're watching quite closely what the reaction is amongst the public and the populace on this. And generally speaking, I think it's been positive. The interesting thing is it's actually been the most positive amongst the younger populations in these countries who are, pragmatic and future-oriented. So I think Saudi could definitely be soon. I think Oman and Sudan could also be on the cards. But I think this is a pretty broad sort of sweep of normalisation. I think, by the end of this year or even perhaps sooner, we could see Israel having diplomatic relations with most of its neighbours in that region.
Well, a lot of your colleagues in the world of diplomacy, a lot of world leaders, certainly a lot of media commentators like to portray Donald Trump as the bull in the china shop of global affairs. But in my mind, he's had a pretty good record in foreign affairs, and this is certainly an historic achievement. How do you think that that will play into the American election campaign? It's obviously a plus for him, but to what extent can it work for him?
I think it's definitely a plus for him going into the campaign. I think his disruptive style of diplomacy has delivered results here, no doubt about it. I guess the caution would be that, American elections, like most, like our own, tend to be decided predominantly on domestic issues. And so whilst this is certainly a feather in his cap, and it'll, improve his appeal as a statesman, I think by and large the terrain over which that election will be fought will still be domestic issues. Yeah,
I reckon it shows, it sharpens the contrast, though, between him and Biden, because he's backed his convictions here and delivered, and Biden said, well, I was always supportive of Jerusalem, but I wouldn't have done it, and he shouldn't have done it, but I won't change it.
Look, that's true. And Biden was, of course, part of the Obama administration, part of 8 years of US policy in the Middle East, which certainly didn't deliver this. It didn't. Biden had the opportunity to do this and he didn't at the time. So it's definitely a point of differentiation there, no doubt about it.
Thanks for joining us, Dave. I appreciate it.
Okay, good to talk, Chris.
Dave Sharma there, who's the Liberal MP for Wentworth, was the youngest ever Australian ambassador to Israel. Just underlining there what a significant day this is in world affairs.